Sarah Mitchell was 28 years old when she decided to celebrate her recent promotion at work in an Italian restaurant in downtown San Diego. She had spent the last 6 years serving in the United States Marine Corps, 3 of them in combat zones in the Middle East, and now worked as a self-defense instructor at a military base in California. That Friday night was special because it marked not only her new position as training coordinator, but also because it was the first time in months that she had gone out to dinner alone, away from the military routine and responsibilities she carried daily. The restaurant was packed, with tables occupied by couples, families, and groups of friends celebrating the weekend. Sarah chose to sit at the bar, where she managed to find a spot near the kitchen entrance. She wore a simple navy blue dress that contrasted with her upright posture and firm shoulders, features that years of military training had molded into her body. Her brown hair was loose, falling over her shoulders, and she had applied light makeup, trying to disconnect for a few hours from the image of the Marine that everyone knew. While waiting for her mushroom risotto order, Sarah observed the activity around her. The bartender prepared colorful drinks, waiters hurried back and forth balancing trays, and lively conversations filled the air with contagious energy. She picked up her phone and began replying to messages from colleagues at the base when she noticed 3 men approaching the bar. They appeared to be in their 30s, wore button-down shirts, and reeked of alcohol mixed with cheap cologne. Their laughter was too loud, their movements clumsy, and Sarah immediately recognized the signs of someone who had drunk too much. The 3 men positioned themselves near her, occupying the empty space beside the bar. Sarah didn't pay much attention initially, focusing on her drink and her surroundings. However, after a few minutes, she felt something that made her frown. One of the men, the tallest of the group with tousled blonde hair, had leaned slightly back and deliberately pressed against her back. The contact was brief but deliberate, and Sarah immediately recognized the invasive nature of the gesture. She discreetly moved away, adjusting her position on the stool, and continued looking ahead, hoping it was just an accident caused by the crowd. A few seconds later, another man from the group, this one with a scruffy beard and a plaid shirt, repeated the movement. He turned as if talking to his friends and pressed his back against hers, remaining in that position long enough to leave no doubt about his intentions. Sarah felt anger begin to boil inside her, but she kept her composure. Years of military training had taught her to assess situations before reacting, to identify threats, and to calculate the best response strategy. She took a deep breath and waited, giving the men one last chance to retreat. The 3rd man, shorter and more robust, completed the sequence of harassment when he deliberately rubbed his back against hers while pretending to reach for something on the counter. It was at that moment that Sarah decided enough was enough. She placed her glass firmly on the counter, the sound echoing slightly in the noisy environment, and turned completely to face the 3 men. Her expression was cold and controlled, her green eyes fixed on the faces that still displayed smug smiles and knowing glances at each other. Sarah didn't raise her voice when she spoke. Her tone was low but full of authority, each word articulated with military precision. She said she had noticed the 3 consecutive incidents, that she knew exactly what they were doing, and that this behavior was unacceptable. The men initially laughed, exchanging mocking glances, as if the situation were a joke. The tallest one responded sarcastically, asking if she didn't know how to accept a compliment, while the bearded one made a crude comment about her being alone in a bar and what that might mean. That's when Sarah decided to reveal who she really was. She maintained her impassive posture and informed the 3 men that she was a Marine, a hand-to-hand combat instructor, and that she had spent years training to neutralize threats far more dangerous than 3 drunken men in a restaurant. She wasn't making threats, just stating facts. Her voice remained calm, but there was a firmness to it that made the bartender stop what he was doing and pay attention to the conversation. Some people at nearby tables also began to notice the growing tension at the bar. The men, however, did not immediately back down. The shortest, seemingly the most intoxicated of the group, stepped forward and made a dismissive gesture with his hand, saying he didn't believe her and that she was just trying to intimidate them. He extended his arm as if to touch her shoulder in a gesture that mixed provocation and disrespect. Sarah reacted. Instantly, in a fluid movement that took less than 2 seconds, she intercepted his arm, applied a joint control technique she had taught hundreds of times, and twisted it so that he was immobilized with his arm twisted behind his back. The execution was so quick and precise that the other 2 men didn't even have time to process what had happened. The immobilized man let out a cry of surprise and pain, and Sarah held him in that position just long enough to make her message clear. She didn't use excessive force, didn't cause any injury, but demonstrated complete control of the situation. When she released him, he staggered back, rubbing his shoulder and looking at her with a mixture of shock and fear. The other 2 men had automatically stepped back, their expressions of confidence completely evaporated. Sarah then explained in a calm voice that what she had just done was merely a basic control technique, something she taught beginners in their first month of training. She said she could easily have disarmed any of them if they had been carrying weapons, neutralized all 3 simultaneously if necessary, and that she had enough witnesses in the restaurant to confirm that they had initiated the confrontation with inappropriate behavior. She wasn't bragging, just stating operational reality. But the effect of her words was devastating to the egos of the 3. The restaurant manager had been alerted by the bartender and quickly approached the situation. He was a middle-aged Italian man with a heavy accent and a worried expression. Before he could speak, Sarah calmly explained what had happened, keeping the facts objective and her narrative clear. Several people in the bar corroborated her version, including an elderly woman who was dining with her husband and had witnessed the 3 incidents of harassment. The manager immediately asked the 3 men to leave the establishment, his voice firm and leaving no room for negotiation. The men tried to protest, claiming it had all been a misunderstanding, that the restaurant was crowded and there were accidental bumps all the time. But their voices sounded weak and unconvincing, especially after the practical demonstration Sarah had provided. The manager wasn't interested in hearing excuses. He pointed to the door and said that establishments like his didn't tolerate harassment in any form, and that if they didn't leave voluntarily, he would call the police. Faced with the choice between leaving or facing legal consequences, the 3 men finally agreed to leave. Before leaving the restaurant, however, the taller of the men turned to Sarah and murmured something intended as an apology, but which came across more as an attempt to salvage his dignity. Sarah simply nodded, not in acceptance or forgiveness, but as an acknowledgement that the matter was closed. She watched as they walked through the restaurant under the gaze of other customers, their hunched postures and hurried steps, contrasting sharply with the arrogance they had displayed minutes before. When the men finally left, the restaurant gradually returned to its normal rhythm of conversation and laughter. The manager approached Sarah and profusely apologized for the incident, offering her meal free of charge as compensation. Sarah thanked him, but insisted on paying, explaining that she had chosen that restaurant precisely because of its good reputation and that an isolated incident caused by inappropriate customers would not change her opinion of the establishment. The manager insisted on at least offering her a complimentary dessert, and Sarah accepted with a small smile. As she finally began to eat her risotto, which had cooled slightly during the confrontation, Sarah reflected on what had happened. It wasn't the first time she had faced harassment or inappropriate behavior, and she knew it probably wouldn't be the last. What bothered her wasn't so much the men themselves, but the persistence of this type of behavior in broad daylight, in public places, with the arrogant assumption that there would be no consequences. She thought of the countless women who went through similar situations but lacked the training or confidence to defend themselves, and felt a mixture of frustration and determination. A woman of about 40 approached the counter where Sarah was sitting. She introduced herself as Rachel and said she had witnessed the whole situation. Rachel expressed admiration for how Sarah had handled the confrontation, commenting that she wished she had that kind of courage and skill. Sarah smiled gently and explained that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the ability to act appropriately even when nervous or uncomfortable. She mentioned that military training had certainly helped, but that any woman could learn basic self-defense techniques and develop the confidence needed to set boundaries. The conversation with Rachel stretched for a few minutes, during which Sarah shared information about self-defense programs available in the community. She explained that many military bases offered classes open to the public, and that civilian organizations also provided affordable training. Rachel jotted down some recommendations on her phone and thanked her warmly before returning to her table. Sarah realized that this brief exchange had transformed what could have been a ruined evening into something potentially productive, an opportunity to educate and empower another person. The bartender, a young man in his 20s with tattoos on his arms, also approached when he had a free moment. He apologized for not intervening sooner, explaining that he had noticed the men behaving inappropriately but wasn't sure how to approach the situation without escalating the conflict. Sarah didn't blame him, acknowledging that establishment employees often found themselves in difficult positions, trying to balance customer safety with the need to maintain a peaceful environment. She suggested that the restaurant consider implementing a clear protocol for dealing with harassment, something that would protect both customers and employees by establishing defined procedures for intervention. While savoring dessert, a perfectly prepared tiramisu layered with coffee and mascarpone, Sarah received a message from her friend Jennifer, also a Marine, asking how her evening was going. Sarah considered for a moment whether she should recount the incident, but decided to keep the conversation light, replying only that dinner was delicious and that she was enjoying the evening. There would be plenty of time to share the story later, and at that moment, she simply wanted to enjoy the peace that had finally settled in. A quiet sense of satisfaction washed over Sarah as she finished her dessert. It wasn't satisfaction from having humiliated 3 men or demonstrated her martial skills, but rather the confirmation that her years of intensive training had served a practical purpose beyond the battlefield. She had protected herself without excessive violence, established clear boundaries without losing control, and potentially prevented those men from repeating the behavior with other women who might be in more vulnerable situations. The restaurant remained busy, with new customers arriving and others leaving. The normal cycle of a Friday night in San Diego. Sarah paid her bill, left a generous tip for the bartender, and thanked the manager again for his quick intervention. As she stood to leave, she adjusted her dress and grabbed her small purse, preparing for the walk back to her apartment, which was just a few blocks away. As she walked through the city's illuminated streets, Sarah reflected on the duality of her existence. By day, she was Sergeant Mitchell, a respected instructor who commanded the instant respect of recruits and officers alike. By night, when she donned civilian clothes and tried to live a normal life, she became just another woman navigating the same challenges and dangers that millions of others face daily. This transition between identities was something she was still learning to manage, finding the balance between revealing her strength when necessary and simply existing without needing to constantly be on the defensive. The night air was crisp, carrying the salty scent of the ocean that characterized the coastal city. Sarah passed groups of people laughing and chatting, couples walking hand in hand, and the occasional homeless person begging for spare change. She maintained her situational awareness, a skill she never truly switched off, noticing emergency exits, assessing potential threats, and keeping a mental escape route constantly updated. It wasn't paranoia, but rather preparedness, a second nature developed through years of operating in hostile environment. When she finally arrived at her building, Sarah climbed the 3 flights of stairs to her apartment, unlocked the door, and entered the small but comfortable space she called home. She took off her shoes, left her bag on the sofa, and went to the window overlooking the city. For a moment, she simply observed the city below, the lights of passing cars, the illuminated windows of other apartments, each containing stories and lives she would never know. Sarah reflected on how that night could have ended completely differently. If she had been someone else, without training or confidence, those men might have continued, their behavior possibly escalating into something worse. If she had reacted with excessive violence, she might be facing legal problems or unnecessarily hurting someone. The fact that she had managed to navigate the situation with control and efficiency was was something she felt genuinely grateful for. She made herself a cup of chamomile tea and sat on the sofa, picking up a book she had been reading about military history. But her mind kept returning to the events of the night, processing every detail, analyzing what she had done right and what she could have done differently. It was a professional habit, this post-action analysis that the military conducted after each operation. She concluded that she had acted appropriately, using the minimum force necessary to establish control, keeping witnesses informed of the situation, and allowing a dignified exit for all involved. The next morning, Sarah woke up early as usual, a routine that years of military training had cemented into her body. She went to the gym for her morning workout, then returned to her apartment to prepare for a day of housework and getting ready for the following week. It was while having coffee that she received a call from an unknown number. She answered cautiously, and a female voice on the other end identified herself as a journalist from a local San Diego newspaper. The journalist explained that she had received a tip about an incident at an Italian restaurant the previous night, involving a female Marine who had defended herself against harassment. Apparently, Rachel, the woman who had spoken to Sarah at the restaurant, worked for a women's rights organization and had mentioned the incident on her social media. Without revealing Sarah's name, but highlighting the importance of women having access to self-defense training. The post had gone viral locally, and now there was media interest. Sarah initially hesitated. She hadn't sought public attention, and her military position required a certain discretion. However, the journalist argued that sharing her story could inspire other women and highlight the importance of self-defense programs. After careful thought and asking for time to consider, Sarah agreed to grant a brief interview on the condition that her full last name and specific work location not be published for operational security reasons. The interview was conducted by phone that same afternoon. Sarah described the events factually, without dramatization, emphasizing not her own ability, but the need for all women to have access to resources that empower them to set boundaries and protect themselves. She spoke about how the Marine Corps had taught her not only physical techniques, but also the importance of situational awareness, emotional control under pressure, and the ability to quickly assess threats. When the journalist asked if she had any message for women who might be reading the article, Sarah replied that strength was not only physical, but also mental and emotional, and that every woman had the right to feel safe and respected in public spaces. The article was published 3 days later, a balanced piece that captured the essence of the incident without excessive sensationalism. Sarah received messages from several colleagues and friends, congratulating her on her response to the harassment and for using the platform to promote an important cause. Her commanding officer at the base also contacted her, not to reprimand her, but to express pride in how she had represented the Marine Corps with professionalism and restraint. In the following weeks, Sarah noticed an increase in registrations for the self-defense classes she offered at the base. Women from the civilian community, inspired by the story, sought training that could help them feel safer. Sarah welcomed each new student with the same dedication she applied to everything in her life, sharing not only techniques, but also the philosophy behind true self-defense, which was to avoid confrontation whenever possible, but to be prepared to respond appropriately when necessary. Her experience that night at the Italian restaurant had transformed into something bigger than herself, becoming a catalyst for important conversations about safety, respect, and female empowerment throughout the San Diego community, a legacy that went far beyond the simple ability to immobilize an aggressor with a perfectly executed joint control tech. 3 months had passed since that night at the Italian restaurant, and Sarah Mitchell discovered that her life had changed in ways she had never anticipated. The article published in the local newspaper had circulated on social media and forums dedicated to women's rights, unintentionally transforming her into a representative figure of something much larger than herself. She regularly received messages from women across the country, sharing their own experiences with harassment and asking for advice on how to respond to similar situations. Sarah did her best to respond to each message with the same attention she would dedicate to any military mission, offering practical guidance without ever making exaggerated promises about what self-defense training could or could not achieve. The classes she taught at the military base had expanded significantly. What began as a weekly session with 10 to 15 participants now required 3 separate sessions to accommodate over 60 civilian and military women. Sarah adjusted her personal schedule to accommodate the growing demand, waking up even earlier to complete her own workouts before the morning classes, and often staying after hours for additional training sessions. She never charged for the extra classes aimed at civilians, considering this work an extension of her duty to protect and serve the community. During these classes, Sarah taught much more than simple combat technique. She devoted considerable time to explaining the psychology of aggressors, how to identify signs of danger before a situation escalated, and the importance of trusting instincts. She frequently shared stories from her military experiences, adapting lessons learned in combat zones for applications in the civilian world. One of her favorite lessons involved teaching women to project confidence through body language, explaining that predators often chose targets based on signs of perceived vulnerability, and that simply walking with straight shoulders and direct eye contact could deter many potential confrontations. Sarah also began collaborating with local women's rights advocacy organizations, including the group Rachel worked for. They organized free community seminars at community centers, high schools, and even some companies that wanted to offer safety training to their female employees. Sarah discovered she had a natural talent for teaching, an ability to break down complex techniques into understandable components, and to adapt her approach to the needs and physical limitations of each student. She was particularly careful when working with women who had survived previous assaults, recognizing that trauma could make physical training both healing and potentially trigger difficult memory. In one of these community sessions, Sarah met a 22-year-old woman named Amanda, who had been repeatedly harassed at her workplace, but felt powerless to respond due to the power imbalance with her supervisor. Amanda didn't necessarily need physical combat techniques, but rather strategies for establishing verbal boundaries and properly documenting incidents. Sarah spent additional time with her after class, discussing available legal resources, explaining how to create contemporary incident records, and connecting her with lawyers specializing in workplace harassment cases. Months later, Sarah received a message from Amanda thanking her because, equipped with accurate information and renewed confidence, she had been able to report her supervisor, who was subsequently fired after an internal investigation revealed multiple complaints from other female employees. Sarah's experience with Amanda reinforced the understanding that her role had evolved beyond simply teaching physical self-defense techniques. She was helping to build a support network, connecting women with resources many were unaware existed, and fundamentally shifting the narrative from passive victim to empowered survivor. Sarah began maintaining a list of community resources, including shelters for victims of domestic violence, crisis hotline, free or low-cost counseling services, and lawyers willing to do pro bono work on cases related to harassment and assault. During this period, Sarah also faced unexpected challenges. Some men on social media criticized her response in the restaurant as excessive, arguing that she had used unnecessary force against men who were simply being friendly. These comments initially irritated, but she learned to see them as educational opportunities. Instead of responding defensively, she patiently explained the difference between accidental contact and deliberate, invasive touching, the importance of respecting others' personal space, and how the context of 3 men coordinating their actions created a clearly intimidating situation. Some of these conversations were productive, with some men genuinely acknowledging that they hadn't considered certain perspectives, while others ended in stalemate. But Sarah maintained her composure regardless. She also received criticism from some female military colleagues who argued that her high public visibility was reinforcing stereotypes that women in the armed forces were aggressive or masculinized. Sarah understood this concern and made conscious efforts in interviews and speeches to emphasize that strength and femininity were not mutually exclusive, that she could simultaneously be capable of neutralizing threats and enjoying dresses and makeup. and that reducing women to rigid categories was detrimental to all. She pointed out that true equality meant that women could choose how to express their identity without being judged as less competent or less feminine based on those choices. One Thursday afternoon, approximately 4 months after the original incident, Sarah was conducting a training session when she noticed an older woman watching from outside the practice area. After the class, the woman approached and identified herself as the mother of one of the 3 men who had harassed Sarah at that restaurant. Sarah was immediately on alert, uncertain of the woman's intentions, but maintained her neutral and polite expression. The woman, who appeared to be in her 50s, gray hair and tired eyes, explained that her son had told her about the incident a few weeks after it occurred, when he finally admitted to being ashamed of his behavior. She said she had sought out Sarah not to confront her or apologize for her son, but to thank her. The mother explained that her son had a history of inappropriate behavior with women, frequently drinking excessively and acting in ways she considered disrespectful and concerning. After the incident at the restaurant, something had changed in him. The experience of being physically controlled by someone he had completely underestimated, combined with the public humiliation and potential legal consequences he briefly faced, apparently served as a turning point. He had stopped drinking, started therapy to work through underlying issues related to respect and relationships, and was genuinely trying to become a better person. The mother said that while she couldn't excuse his past behavior, she was grateful that her intervention had been controlled and proportionate, providing a lesson without causing permanent harm. Sarah was surprised by this revelation. She had never given much thought to the 3 men after that night, assuming they would simply continue their life without significant change. Hearing that at least one of them had used the experience as a catalyst for personal growth was unexpected and, in a way, validating. She thanked the mother for sharing this information and expressed genuine hope that her son would continue his path of self-improvement. At the same time, Sarah was careful not to minimize the seriousness of the original behavior, emphasizing that personal change was an individual responsibility and that no woman should have to tolerate harassment in the hope that it would teach the perpetrator a lesson. That unexpected encounter with her mother remained on Sarah's mind for days afterward. She reflected on the complexities of justice and consequences, on how even negative situations could potentially generate positive outcomes, although this should never be used as justification for tolerating bad behavior. She shared the experience with one of her most dedicated students during a conversation after a training session, discussing the nuances of accountability versus revenge, and how the ultimate goal should always be to create a safer and more respectful society for everyone, not simply to punish offenders. As winter approached, Sarah began planning an expansion of her training program. She submitted proposals to her military chain of command requesting permission and resources to establish a formal community outreach program that would connect military instructors with local schools and civilian organizations to provide regular self-defense and safety awareness training. She developed detailed curricula tailored to different age groups, from teenagers to seniors, recognizing that needs and capabilities varied significantly across demographics. Her proposal included not only physical components, but also modules on digital safety, signal recognition, and relationship awareness, abusive resources, and navigation of legal and support systems after experiences of harassment or assault.